The Apex marketing office in Manhattan was filled with the usual Monday morning buzz as employees settled into their desks, preparing for another long week. Among them, Nina Thompson, the only black analyst in the room, quietly worked away at her computer. As usual, she kept to herself, avoiding unnecessary attention and focusing on her tasks. However, today was different. Without any warning, a cold splash hit Nina's face. She gasped as Coca-Cola drenched her hair, the fizzy liquid dripping down her face, neck, and blouse. Her heart skipped a beat as she tried to process what had just happened. Jessica Whitmore, the office's well-dressed blonde manager, stood in front of her, wearing a sickeningly smug grin on her face. Without hesitation, she had tossed a can of Coca-Cola straight at Nina, hitting her with a direct splash. The soda soaked her clothes, staining the fabric, and her mind raced with disbelief. Jessica's voice was laced with mockery as she tilted her head, pretending to be innocent. "Oops, I did not mean to make you that sticky. Looks like you need a little refreshment," she sneered, casually tossing the empty can onto Nina's desk, as if the act meant nothing. Brad Mitchell, the office's ever-smirking account coordinator, immediately pulled out his phone. "Oh, this is going straight to the group chat," he laughed, zooming in on Nina's face, now streaked with Coca-Cola. "Does she look refreshed or what?" Samantha Chun, the HR assistant, stood beside them, clapping her hands with excitement. "We should get this on Instagram, Brad. Let us show the world how diverse we are here at Apex," she chuckled, already typing the post. Nina sat frozen in her chair, the shock of the moment paralyzing her. Her co-workers gathered around, their laughter echoing through the office, but Nina did not move. She stared at Jessica, her face flushed with a mix of humiliation and rage. Jessica, enjoying every moment of Nina's discomfort, leaned down closer, speaking in a voice only meant for Nina's ears. "You should have known your place, Nina. You really think you belong here? What is next? Your big promotion. Do not make me laugh." Brad's laughter grew louder. "Yes, you must have some great connections to make it this far." The office around them felt oddly quiet despite the cruel words being thrown. The usual hum of computers and phones was replaced with the sound of taunts and laughter. Nina's head spun, but she did not let them see how much it hurt. She could feel every eye on her, everyone in the office either watching or taking part in the cruelty. The phone cameras flashing made her feel small, exposed, and trapped. But in the silence that followed, after the laughter died down, Nina's resolve began to build. She reached for her phone with shaking hands. The world was watching her now, but she was not going to let this moment break her. She typed out a message and hit send. Nina sat at her desk, her phone trembling in her hands as she composed herself. She had been the target of a humiliating prank in front of the entire office, and although the physical discomfort of the cold soda running down her face had passed, the emotional sting still lingered. She took a deep breath, her thoughts swirling. Her mind raced as she considered her options. She could let this slide, as so many others in her position had done before, but today felt different. She had been the target of passive-aggressive remarks and microaggressions since the moment she stepped into Apex marketing. The looks, the comments, the casual exclusion, this was not the first time she had faced discrimination in the workplace. But today, they had crossed a line. Her fingers moved swiftly across her phone screen. Nina opened the email app and typed a message that would shift the entire course of her day. Subject: Unprofessional Behavior and Office Culture at Apex Marketing. Dear HR team, I hope this message finds you well. I am writing to formally address an incident that occurred today, which I believe violates our office's code of conduct and ethics. During the morning hours, I was the victim of a hostile and discriminatory act by a colleague, Jessica Whitmore. She threw a can of Coca-Cola at me, deliberately soaking me with the beverage and subjecting me to further humiliation in front of my peers. I understand that workplace environments can be stressful, But this behavior crosses a professional boundary. This is not a matter of an isolated incident or a simple prank. This is harassment and bullying that has no place in any office. I request that this matter be addressed immediately to ensure that no other employee, especially those from marginalized backgrounds, is subjected to such treatment. I look forward to your prompt response and resolution to this issue. Sincerely, Nina Thompson. After hitting the send button, Nina sat back in her chair, staring at the screen as the email vanished into the ether. She felt a momentary sense of relief. She had taken control of the situation. But she also knew that this email would set in motion a chain of events that could either lead to real change or result in further retaliation. As the minutes passed, Nina continued to hear the buzz of whispered conversations from her coworkers. The laughter had died down, but the air was still thick with tension. Brad and Samantha exchanged quick glances, occasionally throwing a glance in her direction, as though they were curious to see how she would respond. Their taunts and mockery had been calculated, aimed not just at humiliating her, but at silencing her as well. Nina's stomach tightened as she watched Jessica walk toward her, her expression now one of feigned concern. "Hey, Nina," she began, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I'm so sorry if you felt uncomfortable. I honestly didn't mean for it to go that far." Nina looked up at her, her eyes sharp. "Really?" she asked, her voice cold. "Because it certainly felt intentional to me." Jessica's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered, her tone shifting to one of insincerity. "I was just trying to have a little fun, you know? It was nothing personal." Nina did not respond, her mind too focused on the email she had just sent. She could feel her pulse quicken, but this time it was not from fear or anxiety. It was from determination. Jessica walked away, but Nina remained seated, her eyes scanning the office. She saw some employees glancing at her, their expressions a mix of curiosity and discomfort. None of them spoke to her directly. It was as if they were waiting for her to react in a way they could predict. The silence in the office grew unbearable as Nina waited. The message had been sent, but now she had to face the consequences. Would HR take her side? Or would they allow the toxic environment to persist? In the midst of the uncertainty, Nina's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and saw an email notification from Human Resources. Her heart skipped a beat as she opened it. Nina's heart pounded as she opened the email from HR. The subject line read, Unprofessional Behavior and Office Culture at Apex Marketing. The anticipation was almost unbearable. She read the message carefully, her eyes scanning every word for any sign of hope. "Dear Ms. Thompson, thank you for bringing this matter to our attention. We take all reports of harassment and discrimination very seriously. We have scheduled a meeting with you to discuss the incident in detail and review the actions taken. Your concerns are important to us, and we aim to create a safe, respectful, and inclusive workplace for all employees. Please be available for a meeting tomorrow at 10 a.m. Should you have any further information or wish to speak with someone before the meeting, please let us know. Best regards. HR Department. Apex Marketing." The email was polite, but Nina could not shake the feeling that it was just a formality, a way to acknowledge her complaint while allowing the situation to drag on without any real resolution. Her thoughts were clouded with doubt. Would they really take action? Or was this just another way to placate her without addressing the toxic culture that had been allowed to fester at Apex for so long? She closed the email and leaned back in her chair, feeling a mix of frustration and exhaustion. She had taken the first step in fighting back against the mistreatment she had endured, but she was no longer sure if HR would truly have her back. She had heard rumors from other colleagues that HR often sided with management, especially when it came to matters involving employees who were considered troublemakers. And unfortunately, Nina's reputation had already been tarnished by her outspoken nature and unwillingness to tolerate discrimination. For a moment, Nina considered withdrawing her complaint. Maybe it would be easier to just let it go. But then she thought about the many times she had been silenced before, the countless moments when she had swallowed her anger and allowed others to walk all over her. She could not let that happen again. With a deep breath, Nina stood up from her desk, determined to attend the meeting with HR the next day. Whatever happened, she would make sure that her voice was heard. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Nina tried to focus on her work, but the events of the morning hung over her like a dark cloud. She found herself distracted, her thoughts constantly drifting back to the incident and the upcoming meeting. Every time she glanced around the office, she saw the same curious stares, the same whispers that had followed her all day. She had become a topic of office gossip, and it made her feel even more isolated. As the hours ticked by, Nina's anxiety grew. She tried to calm herself by breathing deeply and focusing on the task at hand, but the knot in her stomach refused to loosen. She had to remind herself that this was the right thing to do. This was her chance to make a difference, to stand up for herself and for others who might be too afraid to speak out. Finally, the workday ended, and Nina made her way home. She tried to shake off the tension in her shoulders, but it lingered. She knew tomorrow would be a pivotal moment in her career and in her fight for fairness at Apex Marketing. Whether HR took her side or not, Nina was resolved to keep pushing forward. But the uncertainty of what awaited her the next morning gnawed at her, and she could not escape the fear of being ignored or worse, retaliated against. Still, there was a part of her that refused to back down. The journey had just begun. The following morning, Nina arrived at the office with a heavy heart and a determined mind. As she walked past her colleagues' desks, she could feel their eyes on her. The whispers hadn't died down, and if anything, the air seemed to grow more tense with each passing minute. She had been dreading this moment, yet she knew it was the only way forward. At exactly 9:55 a.m., Nina stood in front of the HR office door, her hand hovering over the doorknob. She took a deep breath, straightened her posture, and knocked. "Come in," came the voice from the other side. Nina opened the door and stepped into the room. The HR manager, Sandra, was seated behind a large, polished desk, her expression unreadable. Beside her sat another woman, who Nina had never seen before, her identity unclear. Was she from legal? Or perhaps someone brought in to mediate the situation. "Good morning, Ms. Thompson," Sandra said, her voice cool but polite. "Please, have a seat." Nina sat down across from them, her palms slightly sweaty. She tried to maintain eye contact but felt her nerves rising. She had to stay strong. She had to make them listen. Sandra opened a file in front of her, scanning the documents inside. "We've reviewed your report and the situation you mentioned in your email," she said, glancing up at Nina. "Before we proceed, would you mind summarizing for us what happened?" Nina hesitated for a moment, gathering her thoughts. She had already written everything down in her complaint, but this felt different. Speaking the words aloud brought them to life in a way that was much more personal. She took a deep breath and began. "I was subjected to verbal abuse during a meeting with my colleagues," Nina said, her voice steady but firm. "It was an incident where, well, I don't think I should have to tolerate the way I was treated. It was discriminatory and hurtful. The worst part is, it wasn't the first time something like this has happened." Sandra nodded as Nina spoke, taking notes. The other woman beside her remained silent, her gaze fixed on Nina as if trying to assess every word she said. "I want to be clear," Nina continued, feeling her confidence grow. "I'm not here to cause trouble, but I can't sit back and let things like this go on. I'm asking for accountability, for proper action to be taken, so that no one else has to go through what I did." There was a long pause after Nina finished speaking. Sandra closed the file in front of her and looked up at Nina with a measured expression. "We understand your concerns," she said slowly. "It's important that we create a safe environment for everyone at Apex. However, You should know that these matters can be complex, and it's not always clear-cut. We will need to conduct a full investigation into the incident you mentioned and speak with the other parties involved. Nina felt her heart race. How long will that take? She asked, trying to keep her tone neutral. Sandra shifted in her seat, glancing at the woman beside her before responding. We don't have a definitive timeline, but we will make sure to look into everything thoroughly. In the meantime, we ask that you continue with your regular duties and trust that we will handle this appropriately. Nina clenched her fists in her lap, fighting the frustration that threatened to overwhelm her. It was exactly what she had feared, an investigation that would drag on indefinitely, with no real sense of urgency. The company had an unfortunate history of sweeping issues like this under the rug. I understand, Nina said, though she was far from satisfied. But I want to make sure this doesn't just disappear. I want this to be taken seriously. Sandra gave a small nod, her eyes softening. We will take it seriously, Ms. Thompson. Please know that. There was another awkward silence as Nina glanced at the other woman in the room. She still had no idea who she was, but she noticed that the woman had been scribbling notes the entire time. It was clear that they were taking some kind of documentation, though it was hard to gauge whether it was being done with genuine intent or just as a formality. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Sandra asked, breaking the silence. Nina thought for a moment, then shook her head. No. I think that's everything for now. Sandra stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. Thank you for bringing this to us, Ms. Thompson. We will keep you updated as the investigation progresses. Nina stood as well, feeling a strange mix of relief and unease. The meeting had gone exactly as she had expected. She had spoken up, but there was no immediate resolution in sight. No guarantee that anything would change. As she left the room, Nina's mind raced. She knew that the next few weeks would be crucial, and she had to stay vigilant. This was only the beginning of a long battle. The days following Nina's meeting with HR felt like a blur of tension. She returned to her desk each morning, her every step weighed down by the uncertainty of what was to come. The office, once a place where she felt relatively comfortable, now seemed to suffocate her with its gossip and judgmental glances. Nina tried to focus on her work, but it was impossible to ignore the murmurs behind her back. Her colleagues, who had once greeted her with warm smiles, now looked at her with either pity or disdain. The tension in the air was palpable, and it felt like every day was another challenge she had to endure. There was also the constant reminder of her decision to speak up. As much as she wanted to put it behind her, Nina couldn't escape the feeling that she had become the subject of whispered conversations and sideways glances. She had made her choice to stand up for herself, but it wasn't without consequences. On the third day after her meeting with HR, Nina received a call that only added to her growing anxiety. It was Sandra from HR, her voice as calm as ever. Ms. Thompson, we have some updates regarding the investigation, Sandra began, her tone professional but distant. We've spoken with the individuals involved, and we're reviewing all the evidence. It will take a few more days before we have a full report, but we appreciate your patience during this process. Nina's stomach churned. She had expected the investigation to take time, but hearing it confirmed felt like an added weight. She knew there was no quick solution to this, and the longer it dragged on, the harder it would be to maintain her resolve. The next few days passed in a haze of uncomfortable silence and subtle exclusion. Her team's once collaborative environment now felt strained. Colleagues she had worked with for years barely acknowledged her presence. Nina couldn't help but wonder if they had been influenced by the reports they'd heard from others, whether they believed the accusations or simply didn't want to get involved. During lunch breaks, she sat alone at her desk, eating in silence. The cafeteria, once a place for friendly conversations and shared laughs, now felt like a foreign land to her. Her friends seemed to have faded into the background, unwilling or unsure how to navigate the awkwardness that had taken hold of the office. One afternoon, Nina's phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from her friend Laura, who worked in another department. "Hey, how are you holding up? I heard the rumors. Don't let them get to you. I know this is tough, but you're doing the right thing." Nina smiled weakly, grateful for the support, but her anxiety was growing with each passing hour. She couldn't shake the feeling that the longer the investigation lasted, the more the company would try to brush the issue aside. At that moment, she decided to take matters into her own hands. It was clear that waiting for a resolution wasn't going to work, and she couldn't just sit idly by. If HR wasn't going to act swiftly, then maybe it was time for her to push for something more concrete. The next day, Nina drafted an email to Sandra. She wasn't sure if it was the right move, but she knew she had to make her voice heard. "Dear Sandra, I appreciate your efforts in the ongoing investigation, but I must express my concern about the pace at which it is progressing. It has been several days now, and while I understand these matters take time, I am concerned that no immediate action has been taken yet. The work environment has become increasingly uncomfortable, and I feel it is affecting my ability to perform my duties. I would appreciate it if you could provide me with a more concrete timeline for the resolution of this matter. Thank you for your attention to this." Nina hit send, hoping that her words would push the investigation forward. She knew she had to keep advocating for herself, but at the same time, she couldn't help but feel the growing pressure of the situation. As the days turned into weeks, Nina's patience began to wear thin. She was walking a tightrope, trying to balance her professional responsibilities with the emotional weight of the ongoing conflict. It was becoming harder and harder to stay focused, and the constant scrutiny from her colleagues only made things worse. Every glance, every whispered conversation behind her back, felt like a reminder of how vulnerable she had become. Yet, deep down, Nina knew that she couldn't back down. She had made her stand, and she wasn't going to let this go unnoticed. She had to see it through, even if it meant facing an uncertain future. A week had passed since Nina sent her follow-up email to HR. Sandra had replied politely, assuring her that the investigation was progressing and that further action would be communicated soon. But to Nina, it felt like another delay, another carefully worded attempt to calm the storm without addressing the damage it had already caused. Each day she walked into the office, the atmosphere felt colder. Conversations stopped when she entered a room. Some co-workers avoided eye contact entirely. Others looked at her with irritation, as if her decision to speak up had disrupted their peace, not her own. The isolation was beginning to take a serious toll on her. One afternoon, Nina overheard two colleagues talking in the break room. They did not see her standing just around the corner. She should have just kept her head down. "This kind of drama is bad for everyone," one whispered. "Yeah. I mean, what did she expect? That management would just fire someone over a Coke incident," the other replied, laughing quietly. Nina stood frozen. Her heart pounded in her chest. The pain in her chest was not just from the words. It was from the realization that people were more concerned about their comfort than about right and wrong. She walked away without confronting them, but her hands were trembling. She had done everything the right way, reported the incident, followed the protocol, stayed respectful, but it was not enough. The system was too slow, too passive, and too comfortable with maintaining the status quo. That night, as she sat alone in her apartment, Nina broke down. The weight of everything came crashing down at once. She cried not because she was weak, but because she had been strong for too long. But after the tears, something changed inside her. She was done waiting. She was done being quiet and respectful while the people who had hurt her faced no consequences. If the company was not going to take a stand, she would. The next morning, Nina got up earlier than usual. She dressed with intention, smart, confident, professional. She walked into the office not with dread, but with purpose. At her desk, she opened her personal email and began typing. Not to HR. Not to Sandra. To the local news outlet. She stared at the screen for a few seconds, then pressed send. The email had been sent. There was no going back. By the end of that day, she received a reply from a journalist who was interested in speaking with her. Nina agreed to a phone call, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of hope. She was no longer just an employee waiting for justice behind closed doors. She had found a way to tell her story, and she was going to make sure it was heard. That night, as she looked at the skyline outside her window, Nina did not feel afraid. She felt powerful. Within 48 hours, the article was published. The headline read, "Corporate Racism Behind Closed Doors, a Marlowe & Cole Employee Speaks Out." Nina's story spread rapidly across social media. It began with a few shares from local activists, then caught the attention of larger voices. Soon, her inbox was overflowing, with messages of support, media requests, and even apologies from strangers who had once worked in the same toxic environments. Her identity had been kept anonymous in the article, but it was only a matter of time before people at Marlowe & Cole connected the dots. The atmosphere in the office shifted sharply again, but this time it was not silent avoidance. It was chaos. The senior leadership called an emergency town hall meeting. For the first time, the CEO, Mr. Carl Whitaker, who had never personally addressed any complaints, stood before the employees and spoke. "We are aware of the article that has brought serious allegations against our workplace culture," he said. "I want to be clear, racism, discrimination, and retaliation have no place in this company. An independent investigation will begin immediately, and we will be taking swift action against anyone found guilty of misconduct." The same Sandra from HR, who had once sent her polished emails with vague reassurances, was suddenly apologizing to Nina in person. Her tone was different now, less polished, more desperate. "I am truly sorry this happened to you, Nina," she said. "We want to make things right." But Nina had learned by now that apologies without accountability meant nothing. "I hope you do," she replied calmly. "Because this is not just about me. This is about everyone who never had the chance to speak up." Over the next 2 weeks, the company placed Claire on administrative leave while the investigation took place. Multiple employees came forward with similar stories, some from years back, now emboldened by Nina's courage. Eventually, Claire was terminated, and the company introduced new anti-discrimination policies and bias training. But Nina knew that real change would take more than a few HR workshops. It would take vigilance, transparency, and people like her refusing to be silent. She gave one final interview to a national outlet, this time revealing her full name. When the host asked her why she had chosen to go public, her answer was simple. "Because silence protects the oppressor, not the oppressed. And I am done being silent." A month later, Nina no longer worked at Marlowe & Cole. She had been offered a position at another firm, one that had openly reached out to her after reading her story, promising a safer and more inclusive workplace. But more than a job, she had found something greater, her voice. And now she intended to use it, not just for herself, but for others like her. Nina had once been a quiet woman in the back of the room. But now, the world knew her name. And she would not be forgotten.